Okay, I have Charles Price with me today. It's good to have you, Charles.
Thank you.
You're over in Toronto, I gather?
That's right. That's where I've lived since 2001 when we came here from the UK to work with a church called the People's Church.
Yeah, we appreciate your time. And obviously, you've had a lot of experience, not necessarily with church planting per se, but seeing at first hand missional communities. What struck you as you've viewed missional communities? What things have impacted you, and perhaps lessons have you learnt or observed from other people, which are perhaps significant for people involved in church planting or thinking about getting involved in either a missional community or a church plant or some other kind of evangelistic outreach?
Yeah. Actually, here in Toronto, and this did spring out of something we did at the People's Church, there's a movement called Move In, which is essentially church planting. They don't use that term because that portrays some kind of hidden big agenda that's behind it. It's a group of young people moving into some of the rough, tough areas of the city. A young man who his brother got killed and he was a teacher. He was in his 20s, just started teaching. He was walking back to his home and he went to a different route and found himself in a community that he didn't even know existed, where there was obviously a lot of poverty, a lot of need. And he was engaged and married, got home, phoned his girlfriend and said, I passed a school that I want to go and teach in. It's right in the middle of an area I didn't even know existed, etc. And so he did that. And then they had this vision of you actually moving into the community. And the big tower blocks, a lot of the people are poor, a lot of them are refugee migrants, to which Canada is very generous, so they're a lot here. And they got some teams. We launched it on a Saturday night. We invited people to come who might be interested in this whole vision, the whole idea. We advertised around. And about 900 people turned up, which was totally beyond their expectation. And then on Friday night, at the end of that meeting, we said, if any of you are really interested in being actively involved in this, come back tomorrow. Come be here by 10 o'clock. We'll have a session, and then we're going to go into some of the communities and get a feel for what is there. And then out of that, we want you to discern whether you want to come and join us. And 300 turned up the next day, which was not expected. Out of that, a nucleus formed because it involved moving into the community as a team. Mainly 19 to 29 was the target age. So young people. You've got to study, you're studying, you've got to live somewhere. You're working in the city, you've got to live somewhere. Carry on with what you're doing normally. Come and live in that community. The only condition that was applied was that they spend one night a week praying for the community. Not praying for your granny who broke her leg last week, but praying for the community, just for the people in the community and the people you're meeting and the people you're getting to know. And that was the beginning. That was 10 years ago now. There's now, it's now in different countries of the world, and there are hundreds of people involved. Here in Toronto, I think it's more than 300 who are actually living in the community now, different communities. And their approach has been to look for, I think they use the phrase men of peace, people who are kind of warm towards you, who on a friendship level are open, and you can build some relationship. And out of that, the one area I know well, my daughter and son-in-law are part of that. My son-in-law is one of the full-time leaders of the movement. They've just got involved in people's lives as they can. They have a policy of an open door. So, anybody wants to come knock on your door, you let them in. You talk to them. You're there to be a friend. It took a while to build anything that you could measure and say, yeah, there's something that's really come out of this. But now they have a group, a gathering that's been meeting for some time. Numbers vary, 30, 40, most of them from completely non-Christian backgrounds. and they've had people come to Christ and baptized, and they emphasize teaching. They meet in one of the apartments, and I've been there only a couple of times, and they will teach for an hour, just solid stuff. And so their strategy has been just to, firstly, to find the people who are men of peace that you can build a relationship with, but then look for where the hurt is, where the pain is. Who are the people in need? Who are the people who are desperate? And the bigger their need, the more you can help them, and often the greater their openness to a whole new way of life is, which includes the gospel. So we observed that they will say their main role is actually preparing people to be missionaries, and they've sent out now dozens of these people who moved in, first of all, to be part of one of the teams. They've been sent off, and their emphasis is the unreached areas of the world. So it's a mission-producing body as well. And, one thing I learned when I came to the People's Church, which had been founded many years ago by a man called Oswald Smith, who wanted to be a missionary, felt God had called him a missionary. And he was turned down from, I think it was about 12 different mission bodies on the grounds of his health, which is quite frail. So he coined the phrase, if you can't go, send a substitute. And he formed the People's Church for the express purpose of raising up missionaries to send them off to the mission field. And he was extremely successful in doing that. And one of the things that became a base of the People's Church is that if you get people involved in service, they will grow, and they will grow significantly. And the kind of Christian life that says, what's in it for me? And we're all a bit like that. We all come at that stage, has to mature beyond that to what am I to be to others. And I think that church growth is based on that desire, not just have a new Christian club, so to speak, but as Jesus said, you're thirsty, come to me and drink, out of your heart will flow rivers of living water. And we recognize you're thirsty, we recognize come to me and drink, but we're a bit slow on the out of your heart will flow rivers of living water. And it's when those rivers are flowing that the intake becomes more effective and fruitful as well. So one of the things they have to remind themselves in moving is we're here for other people. We're here, our value is how we minister to other people. And they won't call it.
How did they manage, because obviously it's very easy to get burnt out in those scenarios, especially if you're living in that community. Open door policy, which is fantastic. But you're in a very, let's say, vulnerable position in terms of people accessing you all the time. Do you find people got burnt out, or was there a way of sort of protecting them?
When they began, they were looking for single people, and that's how it was 10 years ago. Then they started to marry each other, of course. The teams, with maybe half a dozen who'd live in one apartment, and they would share normal life together. So that then was able to operate because they knew that's why I'm living in this block. When they started getting married, and so a couple would set up their own apartment, and they'd become their own team, if you like, with others in the same building. Of course, they had to put in some restraints, especially when children started coming along. So, everybody has to work that out. They have had burnout. They have had people who have crashed badly, actually. They have now got a pastoral support structure in place for those people who are doing this to help set the boundaries. But your boundaries are set not so much for your comfort, and the extra work I do is that I reach out. You're here to reach out, but you need to set the structures and boundaries around you. And because if you don't want that demand made on you, then don't be part of a move-in team, because that's why they exist. It's more than just, hey, Christians, come and live in these communities and just do your normal life as you might elsewhere. You're actually here on a mission. So yeah, they have to set their, I mean, my daughter has 3 little boys, and I think they have good boundaries. They do. And they're also very involved in the lives of some people, some superficially, some significantly and deeply. I haven't asked them how they set those boundaries, but they of course have to. So that's a bit of wisdom they need to apply to themselves. Yeah.
And
there's a come apart and rest a while principle, you know?
Yeah, that's really helpful. And I think, what about strategy? Because I know that obviously you had a clear strategy, but I think from what I've heard you say before, yeah, often our strategies and God's ways of doing things sometimes are don't always dovetailing like we expect. Well, what's your thinking on the importance of strategy and the value we should put on it?
I think strategy is a good compass. It's not a roadmap. I think you make it a roadmap and you stick rigidly to it. And you say, down here, turn right at the light, turn left at the roundabout kind of approach. This is how we do it. Then I think you're likely to miss what God is doing. Because God is at work in ways that we know nothing about. I know that in the People's Church, for instance, we talked a lot about strategy. We talked about how can we reach people, and that's absolutely right that we did, and it was very important that we did. How can we make our church accessible to people who may not normally feel comfortable with the kind of culture that the church throws up? Let's open our doors as wide as we can. Let's welcome them as much as we can. That was important, that was good. But what's intrigued me and interested me is that some of the real converts who today are now leaders, who are in our eldership body now, most didn't come that way. They came completely unexpectedly. So I could tell you too many stories, it would get a bit tedious, but you know, one significant event was a Mormon bishop who led a church not far away from us, and he was driving there during the winter several years ago with his wife, 2 kids in the back row, and they got caught up in traffic. It was the first snow. The traffic was slow, and they were going to be late. And he wasn't preaching anyway in the Mormon church. So he said we got frustrated, and we came by the People's Church, and the car in front drove into the People's parking area. So he said, I followed them in. And my wife said, what are you doing? He said, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm just fed up. Let's see what happens here. Came in at the end of the service. I was talking to some folks at the front, and I saw this couple. I didn't know them, of course. And when they got to me, he pointed me in the eye and said, who told you about me? I said, I don't think I know you. He said, somebody told you about me. I said, why do you say that? He said, because you described me to a T this morning. I said, oh, okay. I know who that was then, but I didn't know it was about you. I didn't know it was about anybody. That was God speaking to you. And took him to my study and led him to Christ that day, he and his wife. And his 2 kids were saved a few weeks later, went back to his Mormon church and told them next week what had happened. And invited them to come to the Sunday evening of that Sunday at the People's Church. And several came with him. And it caused such a havoc in the Mormon church that the authorities closed down that particular congregation that he led. They closed it down, sold the building, and they moved people away to another group. Now, he's been a vital part of our church since. We never had a strategy for reaching Mormon bishops, you know. We didn't have eyes open for that. And I think that, you know, in John 4, when Jesus met the woman of Samaria, disciples had gone to buy food and they came back, and he was talking to her. They were surprised. And he rebuked them and said, I sent you to reap a harvest you have not worked for. others have done the hard work, and you were to enter into their labor. You think there was something going on in this woman's life you know nothing about. Your eyes and look and see her, and she would not fit the profile of what you might expect to be, a new disciple. She's a Samaritan. She belongs to the Mount Gerizim cult. She's been divorced 5 times. She's living with her, and she's not the kind of person you say, yeah, this is the right one to become a disciple of Jesus. But she was. And God is doing things in people's lives that we know nothing about. And who did the hard work? We have no idea. It wasn't another evangelist. It wasn't another disciple. The hard work may have been done by her husbands who left her disillusioned every time. Maybe that was the work that was churning her up. So it's having this discernment, this eyes to look and sense. Remember the end of our street, there was I came home one day, the older couple who lived there. I didn't know them well, but I came home one day and Hillary said to me, I just heard that the wife down the road, she had died last night. She had a heart attack and died. And I felt in my heart I should go and just knock on the door and just offer my condolences. But I didn't. I neglected to do so. A few weeks later, I took one of my children to breakfast one day in a restaurant here, sat down. On the next table was this man. I thought, oh, that's the man who lives down our road. I've never had a conversation. I said to him, do you live so-and-so? He said, yes. I said, I understand your wife died recently. He said, yes, she did. I said, I'm so sorry to hear that. How are you getting on? He told me he was a bit lonely. And he said he came out for a good breakfast on a Saturday morning because he wasn't good at cooking and things. So I said, you come every week? He said, yes. I said, do you mind if I join you sometime? He said, no, I'd love you to. So I did. And we met, quite often, monthly when I was at home for breakfast. And we talked about life and our interests, and eventually he gave me a book to read that was something he was interested in. I gave him Basic Christianity by John Stott to read. The short thing is, at the end of it, he came to Christ, and then he died unexpectedly. And I didn't know any of his family, but his son knocked on our door one day, a couple of days later, and he said, I understand you used to have breakfast with my dad. And I said, yeah, that's what I did. I loved it. He said, well, so did he. So we're going to have a funeral for him. And we got various friends talking about it. Would you come and talk about your breakfast with him? He said, it's a secular funeral. There's going to be no singing, no praying, anything like that. And I said, yes, I'd love to come. On one condition, can I speak last? And he said, yeah, okay, sure, you can speak last. So I got up at the end, and I told a few stories about it. But I told what happened as we met and talked and how he'd come to Christ. And I said, this is his coffin here. He's not in this coffin, his body is, but he is gone to live forever with Christ. I said, that may not make sense to you, but it made sense to Bruce, was his name, in the last months of his life. And afterwards, people came up to me and said, hey, would you meet me for breakfast sometime? So the point is that this was not, when I was going to knock on his door and I neglected to do so, it wasn't because I thought I'll go and lead him to Christ. I'll exploit his grief in some way. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry to hear. But God gave me another chance with him. And it's Jesus said that the harvest is plenty, the laborers are few, and they didn't say, go therefore. He said, ask the Lord of the harvest therefore to send you into the harvest field. In other words, there's a strategist and he's in heaven. And you ask him, well, what is it you want me to do? Who are the people? And then having your eyes open your eyes and look, the fields are right. Of course, there's strategy. We can discern strategy from the book of Acts in certain ways. Paul going into the major cities, going first to synagogues. Again, where there were people who were God-fearing and had some kind of awareness of the Old Testament story, and he himself was from that background, so he could go and identify with them. So there's a strategy there. But having our eyes open to Lydia in Philippi, who was not a Jew as far as we know, was meeting down by the river to pray with some friends. We have no idea who they're praying to. But it wouldn't have been the God of Jesus, because they wouldn't have known anything about him. But they were looking for God, looking for something bigger. And I think I think it's discerning of that, which is the challenge. This is more maybe about personal witnessing than church planting, but the gift of the church planter is the gift of the evangelist. If you plant a church that just shuffles Christians around from elsewhere, that's not real church planting. That's not evangelism. So it is being aware of what God is doing, and His ways are quite unpredictable. And fastest growing church in the world today is in Iran. And one of my sons-in-law is from Iran, the other's from Russia. So I've got two sons-in-law, and we spread our genes around. But he came to Christ over here. But I've actually been involved in Iranian church, and haven't been in Iran, but have been in Armenia, which is next door, where a lot of Iranian Christians come out during the Iranian New Year and have conferences and so on. And they estimate that more people have come to Christ since the Iranian Revolution 30 years ago in Iran than the previous 1,500 years. And what brought that about was the Islamic revolution that most of us in the Western world would have viewed not with pleasure, not as a positive work of God. We would have seen it as a negative thing, but it was a positive thing. God was doing something through that. Yeah.
And that's encouraging, isn't it, for us? Because obviously we're in the middle of a pandemic, which isn't a positive thing for us. But God is able to use these things. You've used a phrase, not today, but I've heard you say it before. You became motivated. When you became motivated, you became mobilized. You became mobilized. I'm sure you motivated because you were mobilized. That's it. Let me get it right. You became motivated because you were mobilized as a teenager. And obviously part of church planting is actually not only being a planter, but also mobilizing a team around you so that you can engage and reach out into the community that are called. How does that play out, do you think, for people? Is that the best way to get people motivated, by mobilizing them? Or?
Well, I think it's certainly a way. I think there's a conventional thinking that says if you motivate people, you'll get them busy. Motivate them and then they'll mobilize. But I think it's the reverse in my experience. I know when we talked about this, you felt it was so in your experience too, that when you get mobilized, you start to do something, that's what motivates you. And when I was some friends in Hereford, where I grew up, when I was in my teens, we decided we'd try to reach the young people in Hereford, and we'd go into coffee bars, we had questionnaires that engaged us in conversation with people and so on. And it changed all our Christian lives, because I read my Bible because I was told, read your Bible. So, okay, read my Bible. But now I read it differently, because I was engaging in conversation about things I didn't know enough about. I couldn't answer some basic questions. So I read my Bible to understand how better to meet somebody on Friday and talk to him about an issue he's raised that I've now looked into the scriptures about. My praying used to be, Lord, bless, all the missionaries and save everybody else. Amen, kind of thing. Now it was, I want to pray for Dan. I'm going to meet him again on Friday night, and praying for his conversion and so on. So I think that's what suddenly gave me a whole new motivation and appetite that led all four of us actually in due course into full-time Christian ministry. All four of us eventually.
So have you tried that? I mean, is that when you were a pastor in the church at People's, did you sort of have a strategy, just sort of throwing people out into ministry to sort of help them to get motivated? Is that how you try to fire them up?
That's one way for sure. And I mentioned move in just now, where people moving in these communities. That was been the source of significant growth in people who've done that. But yes, we have had mission trips where we send people off for a couple of weeks or a month, and you know, they're limited in who can go on them, of course, because there's cost factors and so on. But our intention in those groups is that the people come back having had a taste of what God is doing and their involvement in it, that can then be fanned into a greater flame. And I think it's true. Mission societies will tell us that many of the folks who go full time are folks who first went on a short-term journey and became motivated by that and called by that. So, you know, at one stage we were having discussions about how do you measure the effectiveness of our church? Do you measure it by attendance? No, that's a superficial measurement. It's an important one, but it's superficial as far as what you really want to accomplish, which is substance. Do you measure by confessions of faith, by baptisms? And we decided we'd measure it by how many people in our congregation were actively involved in service, range from basic things like whether it's ushering or directing in the car park to get people parked reasonably, to Sunday school teaching, to youth work, to outreach, a whole range of things, not all necessarily directly frontline spiritual things, but things where people felt they were participating and they were seeing the benefit of what they were doing in other people's lives. And we were talking about this, you know, a while ago, that one of the most fruitful sources of ministry has been our car parking team, because we had 3 services and we had about one after another, and we had about a dozen people who were involved in the car parking arrangements and so on for each. So you got 36 people every week, maybe 30, I've forgotten how many, you know, who are involved in that in some way or other. And he says it's very basic, and we've had people there who weren't even Christians when that we say, hey, come and join the team. They come to the church and they just wanted something to do. But out of that parking team, it was interesting how many people went on into leadership, small groups, eldership, teams that they became a vital part of. And I think giving people appetite by serving in some way then deepens and spreads. Of course, must always remember, as I heard, I think it was David Shepherd, who was a bishop of Liverpool many years ago. He wrote a book, and he said, in Christian ministry, you need an endless capacity for disappointment. And I think that's true. It is true that you talk about these stories that are successful. Those are one out of many that crash and burn as well. But I think that getting people involved in ministry of some kind is an essential ingredient in them having an appetite that deepens for God, for His Word, for people, for involvement in reaching them.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Charles. Certainly encouraging, and you know, it's really important, isn't it? We bring people in and give them those opportunities to serve and to, and I think people want to in the main as well, and that helps them on their spiritual journey.
Right. So, yeah, and coach them as well.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm gonna close off this conversation. We could keep going for a lot longer. So thank you for joining me today, and we'll have to have another catch up.
God bless. Yeah.